we met last, I had asked you to think a little bit about issues raised by Zakaria and Sarah Med around this issue of white stream feminism and how that discourse dislocates or relocates subjects that do not identify as white feminists, and why that, these voices that challenge the centrality of white stream feminism. Okay, it's working. So this is what we did. Okay. So where I want to begin today is, and actually I'm gonna have this so I can see what time it is, because otherwise I can't see it. What I wanted to do today was kind of pick up where we left off last time. And especially there were two questions that I think are very helpful for us to pivot to talking about intersectionality. One was this question about who are these white stream feminists and how intentional or accidental is their commitment to white stream feminism, which I think is a very important question for us to think with, no? Because we can say that not everybody is like J.K. Rowling's, a TERF that wants to exclude from feminism as a community individuals that may identify as women, but were not born biologically women, right? So the question, and this is a question we've already talked about, who belongs where and why, which is central to our growing engagement with the notion of what feminism is, what it does, why it matters, and where we belong in this. And the other question that really brings us to, that was raised last week, that I think really brings us to the importance of our meeting today, is the question of intersectionality, right? So, and what intersectionality means, how it can help push past this conundrum. It's kind of an impossibility. If, as the person asking the first question has posited, it's quite possible that we can have really committed feminist thinkers, activists, or even people outside of academia who identify as feminists, even if all these different people can still push very normative feminist positionalities, is there something that can help us? And if the answer is yes, is this something intersectionality? And intersectionality as a concept, an analytic that can help everybody. So I asked you today to read the words of Jennifer Nash, who is a very important scholar, to try and see if we can find some solutions. Sorry, let me just get here. So intersectionality, in many ways, is everywhere. No? So as we saw with the word feminism, we see it on newspapers, we see it on the streets, if there are demonstrations, or even, again, gadgets, T-shirts. No, it's a mainstream word. When I speak to freshmen at Northwestern who come to take, for example, Introduction to Feminist Studies, many of them say, I identify as an intersectional feminist. And I say, cool, what does that mean? And silence, usually, right? So, but, remember, the United States, sorry, I was going ahead with my PowerPoint on my computer habit. So, of course, as I told you, I live and work in a very problematic space. Not everybody's has the same positionality as a scholar, as a teacher, as a feminist as I do. But, you know, trying to find, to go back again to the two questions I put on the screen, trying to find a way past the acknowledgement that there are hegemonic positions within feminist discourse inside and outside academia is important. And it's vital, no? So it's worth asking ourselves, what is intersectionality? How do we define it? And also here I put for you an assignment that I didn't give you, but that I and other colleagues in gender and sexuality studies at Northwestern often assign to our students, just like we did together just orally with the word feminism. Because it's important, you know, to understand what we mean. No? If I talk to you about intersectionality and we don't break it down, right, then I'm thinking I'm talking about intersectionality. Each of you is thinking that you're talking about intersectionality as well, and we really don't go anywhere. And this is an important point, and we'll come back to it, hopefully, in the next half hour. So, how would you define intersectionality? If there is anyone brave enough to take the mic, based on what you've read, but also based on what you think it means, because we don't necessarily have to agree. And this is actually a very important point. I ask you to read certain scholars, but it's not because I agree with them or I think they give the best definitions. No, simply because they ask interesting questions, but you know, we don't have necessarily to swear by anybody's Bible, as it were, right? So, anyone wants to volunteer their definition of intersectionality? Britta, you look like you have something to say. Yeah, you see, I knew it. I heard the telepathic waves coming my way.
So I think for me, intersectionality means that one single person has very many different aspects of their maybe personality, but also preconditions. Like some aspects of their life that happen to fall upon them, they have no power over, like maybe being white or maybe being straight. You can't decide those kind of things. And then how those different aspects and challenges in everyone's lives influences those people, and sometimes those aspects can overlap with other people. Like maybe for me, I'm a woman, and many people here in this room are women. That overlaps, but then there are things that don't overlap. I'm not from East Asia, so those aspects don't overlap. So I don't have racist experiences because of that, or other nice experiences because of that.
You see, I knew it. I heard the telepathic waves. Anybody else wants to add something to this definition, you know, which is expansive? No? Anybody can think of examples, other examples other than race, categories of identity like women or men, for example, can bring, and this goes back also to this question of how we bring people together across difference, but also how, you know, there is always a way to keep people apart. Iran, you want to say something? I know that you want to say. You've been wanting to say something even before Britain wanted to say something. Yes.
I think intersectionality is saying that we cannot put any single person into only one box with only one label attached to this box, even though people do share some similarities. So there are always many different identities or different characteristics or different life experiences and the journeys embodied in each different person. So besides noticing the similarities, people also should allow to recognize and accept differences and even tension between one and another. And maybe this is the starting point of understanding every single human being and and explore for understanding and solidarity. Yeah.
So what you have added that's very important to Rita's already expansive and comprehensive definition is not just, oh, sorry. No, is the fact that intersectionality is not just a theoretical concept, but it can be a practice. It can be a feminist practice. It can be a feminist practice for inclusivity and community building, which is also what we've encountered in Ahmed's Living a Feminist Life. Yes, sorry. I hadn't seen you.
It's good. I sit in the corner. I just think because last time we talked about whether this gender discourse and this feminist discourse hinder that people standing together because they exclude, like we talk about J.K. Rowling, they exclude people because they have some
Yes. We leave
certain
their motives to
certain
them for now.
standards, and we talk about whether if we continue to talk about genders and feminism today, does it exclude men or other people? And we ignore that. This is actually what we are focusing on is a human right problem. And I think this question has been hovering around, and I thought about the Me Too case in China about Xianzi. And I heard about a talk by Xianzi and her lawyer in Hong Kong. And they were talking, the lawyer is a man, a cis man. And before he took over Xianzi's case, he never paid any special attention to gender studies or feminism. And he took this case just because he wants to, he just want Xianzi to have some basic human rights, like he can have some free speech. Because she was violated, she was arrested, but people should allow her to speak. But as he proceeded with this case, he and Xianzi faced so many problems, so many things they cannot imagine in the normal case. For example, they asked for the footage on the hall, in the room of the day when Zhu Jun harassed her, but the footage was just gone. Actually, they have that in the archive, but they can just not get it. And they go to the police station, and the police said, 10 years ago, Xuanzi also filed this case against Zhu Jun, but the file cannot be reached now. They cannot have that. And the witness, the other, I think another staff in the CCTV just are not available for the court as witness. And they say they have to 穷尽一切, they have to exhaust every strength, every chance, they have every relationship they have to speak freely, just to speak the truth. But even that is not allowed. So I really think this suffering together, this can just cultivate this empathy for women and all this patriarchal society we are facing. Even men and even people have privilege, they were ignorant about the suffering and the difficulties of women or the minorities. Now they understand what situations they are in and how we are united.
So to bring this back to intersectionality
Yes.
as a practice, you would say that intersectionality as a practice can help cultivate this empathy needed? Or are you
Yes.
saying that intersectionality can also be a mood, an affect, an emotional positioning
Yes.
that recognizes that there is, for example, this common human right to
Yes.
fair representation, access to materials, so the latter. Yeah, this is a very important point. Yes, Sume.
Then my direct question would be, does intersectionality always has to be something positive?
For example,
I mean, like the sufferings or something bad that can still can be called intersectionality. So intersectionality doesn't necessarily has to promote something.
of course, no, and we'll get to Crenshaw, hopefully soon, Kimberle Crenshaw in the next few moments. But that's precisely how, for example, Kimberle Crenshaw formulates her definition of intersectionality based on the lived embodied experience of Black women and Black men within US society. So it emerges from recognizing that there are, and Loretta Ross, who's a very prominent Black feminist scholar who's written on reproductive justice in the United States, and whose model of reproductive justice developed right out of the model of human rights. To go back to what you were just saying, talks about intersectionality as vulnerabilities that people may possess. And so vulnerabilities that may be, for example, a physical disability or a socioeconomic disability. So usually actual intersectionality emerges to address all those factors, to go back to Britta's definition, all those factors that often not chosen by an individual come to challenge and render difficult one's lived experience in the world, in one's society. So it's not that intersectionality has to have this positive value. That's why I was distinguishing the theoretical academic definition from the praxis, right? So it's an important question. So let's move on. Though as always, I personally am more interested in what you have to say, but I know I put some of the definitions given by some of my students. You can read them later, just so that you see what these students who are like you, interested in intersectionality, in feminism defined. But we can say that for kind of bringing together what you said here, what academics and people outside academia say, we can see intersectionality is practice, something we do. It's a way to know also the world we live in, right? In the work of many scholars, intersectionality is a concept that allows us to get to understand how we generate and produce knowledge about individual positionalities. So it's an epistemology, it's an identity that one can claim, no? In a way that recognizes the challenging aspects that we were just talking about, but also creates the possibility for a more complete understanding of oneself and other. It is feminism for some, not for all, of course. As I was saying, a form of knowledge is a form of learning and pedagogy, especially, for example, as I was mentioning, in Loretta Ross' context as an activist and as a scholar, She talks about intersectionality as a way to teach others about our varied backgrounds, possibilities, abilities, or disabilities. And also is a way for us to learn. And it's, you know, it can be, in this sense, because it's knowledge, it can be a form of power. No, it can give visibility and therefore power to otherwise underrepresented or invisible communities. So this is something that for you to think about. And many say the future. That was the future of feminism. We'll come to this. So one of my students, Marilena, when I asked, okay, so who invented it? No? This term that it's now in the mainstream. No? She immediately, like many of us, turned to Kimberle Crenshaw, no? Saying this is something that Crenshaw invented, and it emerged in 1991, and so on and so forth. But is that really the case? No? And why does it matter who invented the intersectionality? Like, for example, we use the word feminism. Does it really matter who invented it? As we saw, yes, it does really matter, right? So these genealogies do matter. But in the case of intersectionality, they matter even more. And this is why I asked you to read the work of a dear friend of mine, and unfortunately no longer my colleague at Northwestern, Jennifer Nash. Jennifer Nash is, I think, one of the most interesting contemporary Black feminist authors and writers. And in Black Feminism Reimagined, after intersectionality, she really dissects the intellectual history of intersectionality to expose the fact that given its now established identification with Black feminist authors in general, in particular with Kimberle Crenshaw, this situation has created an immense burden for US Black feminists who, as the known guardians of what intersectionality is, does, and mean, have to keep protecting it or policing the boundaries of intersectionality, this mysterious land, from other interlopers that try to appropriate it. So the main goal of the book, and I ask you just to read a few pages, I know you'll say, but it was at least 50 pages, but you know, the book itself as a whole is fantastic, so you should read the whole book. But so what she sets out to do is to create an alternative intellectual history of intersectionality to kind of free Black women from having to fight what she calls intersectionality wars. And this is a work that she did for quite a few years that then culminated in. And so, for example, in this essay published in 2017, she kind of takes to task this obsession with who invented it. And in many ways, it's the similar practice that we see with so many analytics that we use in feminist theory, in queer theory, that there is some sort of, there has to be an inventor. And only that inventor then creates the right genealogy for the impact that this invention, in this case, intersectionality, engender. So pushing back against that, Jennifer Nash creates her own version of intersectionality, looking way before Crenshaw and asking who were the voices, especially voices that did not belong to the nascent white stream, or not yet at that time white stream, but Anglophone movement in the favor of the rights of women that was emerging among the intellectual elites, both in Britain and the United States. So who are those voices that today we could read a bit anachronistically as intersectional? And so she brings out of history all sorts of really important figures, like Anna Julia Cooper, who was a former enslaved woman, who then went on to become a doctor, a teacher at both in mathematics, but also in literature, and who wrote beautifully and powerfully in ways that we can recognize today as foregrounding the intersectional identity, for example, of Black women. And we have many others, Mary Church Terrell, who was a very important author. And I know that these are not famous names, no? And maybe they are not names of people you're asked to read. And again, now we're still in the US context. But these are names that in the work of Jennifer Nash show us how we don't really need the analytic of intersectionality to find voices way before Crenshaw, arguing exactly for the understandings and the praxis that you have presented and shared with everyone today. And this, and of course, we have moments like in the early 1970s, these Black feminist activists like Demita Frazier, Beverly Smith, Barbara Smith, they went on to become really important also intellectuals. We have these voices coming from the Combahee River collective, making a very strong case for exposing, sharing, and kind of pushing past the intersectional experiences of women of color. So you will say, and then we have more examples, Audre Lorde, that we will talk more about in a moment, but also next week. Audre Lorde, who basically was this fantastic author, poet, teacher, scholar, going around telling anyone who would listen what it meant to be an intersectional subject that kept being read all in one way. For example, as a woman or as a Black woman, whereas she was always trying to push back against this flattening of the ways in which she understood intersectionally her identity. And this is from a speech she gave at the conference. Sorry, I keep going back to my computer. So, entitled "The Master Tools Will Never Dismantle the Master's House," which is a text I really want you to read and spend time with, so we're going to talk about it next week. But we can see, in other words, through the way in which Nash asks us to rethink the conventional genealogy of intersectionality, how we can have a much deeper, more extensive, and in a way more inclusive understanding of how we can deploy this term. This in and of itself is a queer use of the term intersectionality. And we don't have time to go into this too much. But I put for you, the definition of queer use that Sarah Med wrote about just a few days ago in a post on her blog, Feminist Killjoy. Because in many ways, I would really love it if all of you, in your writings, in your thinking about feminisms, about intersectionalities, try to use these terms in a queer way. Not that I want you all to become queer. I would like you all, though there would be nothing wrong, and actually if there were more queer subjects, maybe we would be a much happier society. But as she writes here, let's see. By queer uses, I mean how things and spaces can be used in ways that they were not intended, or by those for whom they were not intended. So if we think of this way, of this practice, vis-a-vis intersectionality, no? Instead of thinking as a term that belongs all in academia, or that maybe it wasn't meant for us because we don't identify, if you remember, we were talking about this last week, we don't identify as Black Afro-German women, for example. No? That was the example I gave you taken from Audre Lorde's the documentary about Audre Lorde's Berlin years. So if, as Britta was saying, we think of words or spaces or places that we know were not meant for us, and we then enter in them, like Audre Lorde does, for example, especially in her speech, The Master Tools, that is a queer methodology. That is a queer use of a space. And so that's also what Jennifer Nash is doing in her book. She's queering intersectionality, queering it to try to change the way it's being understood and policed. Now, time flies even when you're not having fun. And of course, so let me wrap things up very quickly. And as always, I really hope you will take time to go through the different slides, because and I don't know if you've noticed this, but all the different slides are annotated. And you also have all the links that I've used for these images so you can find more. Of course, in Nash genealogy and new historiography of intersectionality, Kimberle Crenshaw appears, but she now appears in a long lineage of other voices that predates her and follow her. And what Nash also does, and this is just a model here, for all of us as scholars, what Nash also does is to look at someone who's been incredibly demonized by the community of Black feminist academics in the US, and is to engage Jasbir Puar's scholarship, especially in this essay, I Would Rather Be a Cyborg Than a Goddess, that is fantastic, where Puar says at this point of the debate, everybody's using this word intersectionality, but it doesn't really mean anything. It just keeps women of color feminists trapped in an identity category that is not really doing anything for them. For this, she was demonized, right? So what is then the solution? Let me quickly move there. So what is the solution? Is to move beyond the defensiveness that, especially for Black feminist authors, thinkers, activists, that has been engendered by seeing intersectionality as something that belongs only to Black women. And that when anybody else, for example, a scholar like Jasbir Puar, who identifies as a queer woman of color feminist, who engage in critical studies, when she dares to question the validity of intersectionality as a praxis, as a theoretical construct, she gets attacked in ways that are rather abominable. So Nash says, let's leave that aside, no? Also because it engenders this incredible labor for black feminists to keep defending this territory. And so her suggestion, and especially in her recent scholarship, she's gone farther, is to welcome anyone with an investment in black women's humanity, intellectual labor, and political visionary work, anyone with investment in theorizing black genders and sexualities in complex and nuanced way. So I've talked to her, and I think we can go further. We take away the black, and we can leave this blank space where we can introduce whatever blank identity category matters to us. It can be queer, it can be the Sinophone, it can be anything that matters to us as an object of research, of intellectual engagement. That, I think, is the way forward if we want to use intersectionality. Otherwise, it is a catchy theoretical word. We can claim it without really understanding its complex history, way before Crenshaw was even imagined by her ancestors. And then, if that's what we do, remain with this word at an intellectual level, then it's no use to us, no? Just like the word feminism. So my hope for you is that not only you will read the entire book by Jennifer Nash, but you will find a way, just like it's the case with feminism, you will find a way to make this concept, intersectionality, help you. So while it doesn't have to be necessarily positive, like Suman was asking, it can lead to a more positive future if we feel this is something we can use to help others in a legal case, or to be more confident that we can be seen and heard in the context we want to occupy, as citizens, as students, as individuals. And this is why it's important to think a little bit about intersectionality, its possible genealogies, and also its dangers, right? Like all words, if it becomes a stable signifier, then it becomes empty of meaning. Okay, so I think the time has come, if I'm not mistaken. So I will stop here, again, with the invitation to exactly 2 p.m. Look. Not only I have telepathic powers, I also have I've used Apple products so much that I think I'm on Cupertino time all the time. So please, read through the slides. I often create slides that are meant for you as an itinerary. And please keep thinking about these questions. And then when we meet again, not tomorrow we will meet at 11 sharp to talk about, transferring some of these concepts to the sinosphere. But when we meet again here next Tuesday, we will keep talking about these issues, okay? So you're free to go. Goodbye.